I'm standing in my grandfather's study, holding a handwritten note that just shattered my world. My hands are trembling as I read his words for the third time. Emma, you are not my grandchild. You never were. I'm leaving everything to my real family. The funeral was yesterday. Today, the family gathered for the will reading, and while my cousins inherited millions, I got this note, just this note. 28 years of Sunday dinners, bedtime stories, and my little Emma, all of it apparently a lie. My Aunt Margaret is watching me from the doorway, her lips curled in satisfaction. Well, are you going to make a scene, or will you accept reality and leave quietly? Behind her, my cousins Brad and Jessica whisper among themselves, probably calculating how much bigger their inheritance just got. The lawyers have already left. The estate is settled, case closed. But something about this note feels wrong. The handwriting looks like Grandpa's, but the words? These aren't his words. In 28 years, he never once made me feel like an outsider. Even when my parents died when I was 12, he held me close and said, Emma, you're the most important person in my world. What would you do in this situation? Would you fight back or walk away? Comment below, I want to hear your thoughts. I fold the note carefully and slip it into my purse. Margaret is still waiting for me to cry, to beg, to break down. Instead, I smile. You're right, Aunt Margaret, I should accept reality. I walk past her toward the door. But first, I think I'll do some research. The look of confusion on her face tells me everything I need to know. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with betrayal, it starts with love. My name is Emma Catherine Walsh, and until yesterday, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I'm 28, a forensic accountant with a nose for finding hidden assets and buried secrets. Ironic, considering I was about to uncover the biggest secret of my own life. I grew up believing I was the daughter of Michael and Sarah Walsh, Grandpa's youngest son and his wife. They died in a car accident when I was 12, and Grandpa Robert Walsh became my guardian, my anchor, my whole world. Robert Walsh wasn't just any grandfather. He built Walsh Industries from nothing, a construction company that grew into a billion-dollar empire spanning real estate, manufacturing, and energy. Forbes estimated his net worth at $1.2 billion. But to me, he was just Grandpa, the man who taught me to play chess, who helped with my math homework, who never missed a single school play or graduation. The Walsh family compound sits on 50 acres in Connecticut. The main house is a sprawling Victorian mansion where Grandpa lived alone after Grandma died 15 years ago. My Uncle David's family, that's Margaret and their twins Brad and Jessica, live in the guest house about a quarter-mile away. They've been managing the day-to-day operations of Walsh Industries for the past decade. I was the odd one out in many ways. While Brad and Jessica grew up with trust funds and zero work ethic, I put myself through college and graduate school. I insisted on making my own way, working for a forensic accounting firm in Boston rather than joining the family business. Emma has too much pride, Margaret would say during family dinners. She thinks she's better than us. But Grandpa always defended me. She's got integrity, that's rare in this world. The family dynamics were complicated. David, Margaret, Brad, and Jessica all lived off the company, drawing massive salaries for minimal work. Margaret drove a different luxury car every season. Jessica had never held a real job, spending her days shopping and posting on Instagram. Brad was working on his third failed startup, funded entirely by family money. I was different. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a used Honda Civic, and took pride in solving complex financial crimes. My colleagues knew I came from money, but they respected me because I earned my place. Where are you from? Comment your city. I love hearing from viewers all over the world. The warning signs were subtle. Over the past year, Margaret had been making little comments. Robert's getting older. His memory isn't what it was. Or Emma, you really should visit more often. You never know how much time we have left. But when I did visit, Grandpa seemed sharp as ever. We'd discuss my cases, his business ventures, current events. He'd quiz me on financial regulations and nod approvingly when I answered correctly. You've got the Walsh mind for numbers, he'd say. Too bad you won't let me put it to work for the family business. I like solving puzzles that matter, I'd reply. Catching embezzlers, finding hidden assets for divorce cases, helping families recover stolen money. He'd smile, That's my girl, always fighting for justice. 3 weeks ago, I got the call. Grandpa had suffered a massive heart attack. By the time I drove down from Boston, he was already gone. The funeral was everything you'd expect for Robert Walsh, hundreds of mourners, business leaders, politicians. I gave a eulogy about the grandfather who taught me that money means nothing without integrity, that true wealth comes from the relationships you build and the principles you uphold. Margaret cried beautifully for the cameras. David looked appropriately solemn. Brad and Jessica wore designer black and fielded condolences like they were accepting awards. But I noticed things, little things. Margaret had already started redecorating the main house. Jessica was talking about converting Grandpa's study into a yoga studio. Brad was on his phone the entire service, apparently fielding calls about some new investment opportunity. They weren't grieving, they were celebrating. The will reading was scheduled for the day after the funeral. Edward Hawthorne, the family attorney for 30 years, called us all together in Grandpa's study. The room smelled like his pipe tobacco and old leather books, familiar, comforting scents that made my heart ache. Hawthorne read the will with his usual professional detachment. The vast majority of the estate, Walsh Industries, the properties, the investment portfolio, went to David and Margaret to be managed in trust for Brad and Jessica. I got $50,000 and some personal effects. A token gesture, really, for someone who'd been part of the family for 16 years. But then Hawthorne handed me that note. "Mr. Walsh specifically requested you receive this," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. I unfolded it with shaking hands and read those devastating words. "Emma, you are not my grandchild. You never were. I'm leaving everything to my real family." The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret's face showed a mixture of sympathy and satisfaction. David looked uncomfortable. Brad and Jessica exchanged glances. "I'm sorry, Emma," Hawthorne said quietly. "Robert was very specific about this message. Rate this situation on a scale of 1 to 10 for heartbreak. I honestly can't imagine anything more devastating. But here's the thing about being a forensic accountant: you learn to look beyond the surface. You learn that when something doesn't make sense, there's usually a reason. And this note didn't make sense. The ride back to my apartment in Boston should have been the longest 2 hours of my life. But instead of crying, instead of grieving, my mind was working. I kept thinking about that note. The handwriting looked like Grandpa's, but something felt off. The phrasing was wrong. In all my years with him, he'd never used the phrase real family. He'd never made me feel like I wasn't his real granddaughter. More importantly, the timing bothered me. Why wait until after his death to deliver this bombshell? If he really believed I wasn't his grandchild, wouldn't he have confronted me years ago? Wouldn't he have demanded a DNA test? By the time I pulled into my parking garage, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to accept this quietly. I was going to investigate. My apartment felt different that night, smaller, lonelier. I sat at my kitchen table with the note spread out in front of me, my laptop open, ready to do what I do best: follow the money and uncover the truth. First, I researched inheritance laws in Connecticut. What I found was interesting. If someone challenges a will within 6 months of probate, and if they can prove fraud or undue influence, the entire estate can be reopened. But I needed evidence, real evidence. I started with the obvious question: was I really not Robert Walsh's biological grandchild? Here's what I knew about my parents' story. My father, Michael, was Robert's youngest son, born when Robert was 45. Michael met my mother, Sarah, in college. She was a literature major from a middle-class family in Vermont. They married young, had me 2 years later, and died in a car accident when I was 12. I'd never questioned this story because I had no reason to, but now I needed proof. I pulled out my laptop and started searching through digital records. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, death certificates, all the paper trail of a life lived and lost. My parents' marriage certificate was easy to find online. Michael Robert Walsh married Sarah Catherine Miller on June 15, 1994, in Hartford, Connecticut. My birth certificate took longer to track down, but I found it through the Connecticut Vital Records database. Emma Catherine Walsh, born March 22, 1996, to Michael Robert Walsh and Sarah Catherine Miller Walsh. Father's name, Michael Robert Walsh. Mother's name, Sarah Catherine Miller Walsh. Everything looked legitimate, but something nagged at me about my mother's maiden name, Miller. It was so generic, so common, perfect for someone who wanted to hide. What would you do next? Keep digging or accept the DNA evidence? Let me know in the comments. I decided to dig deeper into my mother's background. Sarah Catherine Miller from Vermont, born in 1971, died in 2008. But when I started searching for records of her childhood, her family, her life before she met my father, I found almost nothing. No high school yearbook photos, no college transcripts I could access, no family members listed in obituaries. It was as if Sarah Miller had appeared fully formed at age 23 when she met my father. That's when I remembered something else. When I was little, maybe 8 or 9, I'd asked Grandpa why I didn't have any relatives on my mother's side. No grandparents, no aunts and uncles, no cousins. Your mother was an only child, he'd said. Her parents died when she was young, just like what happened to you. That's why she understood how important family really is. But now, sitting in my apartment at midnight, that explanation felt convenient. Too convenient. I made a list of everything that seemed off. 1. My mother's mysterious background. 2. The timing of Grandpa's revelation. Why wait until death? 3. Margaret's recent comments about Grandpa's memory. 4. The family's quick acceptance of my exclusion. 5. The fact that I looked nothing like the rest of the Walsh family. That last point hit me hard. I'd always attributed my differences to taking after my mother's side. The Walshes were all tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and square jaws. I was petite, blonde, with delicate features. Grandpa used to say I was a beautiful flower among thorns, but what if the differences ran deeper than appearance? I spent the next 3 days researching, calling in favors from colleagues, using my professional resources to dig into public records. What I found changed everything. There was no record of Sarah Catherine Miller before 1993. None, as if she'd been born the year before she met my father. But there was a record of Sarah Catherine Morrison, born in 1971 in Burlington, Vermont. Sarah Morrison, who had attended the University of Vermont as a literature major. Sarah Morrison, whose parents died in a house fire when she was 21, leaving her completely alone in the world. Sarah Morrison, who disappeared from all public records in early 1994, just months before Sarah Miller married Michael Walsh. The pieces were starting to come together, but I needed more. I needed to understand why my mother had changed her name, why she'd hidden her identity, and most importantly, what any of this had to do with Grandpa's note. That's when I remembered something else, something that had always puzzled me. When my parents died, Grandpa became my legal guardian without any court battles, any challenges from my mother's family. At the time, I was too young and traumatized to question it. But looking back, it seemed strange that no one from my mother's side of the family had ever tried to contact me. Unless they didn't know I existed. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed everything? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. I was about to close my laptop when I noticed something else in Sarah Morrison's college records. She hadn't just been a literature major, she'd also taken several courses in genealogy and family history research. Why would someone interested in family history completely erase her own past? Unless she was hiding from something or someone. Or unless she was protecting something, someone. Like a daughter. Like me. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since college. I called in sick to work. My boss, Jennifer, wasn't happy, but I convinced her I needed time to handle my grandfather's estate. If only she knew what I was really handling. I drove back to Connecticut with a plan. I needed access to Grandpa's personal papers, his private files, anything that might explain the connection between my mother's hidden identity and that devastating note. But first, I needed to talk to the people who claimed to be my family. I started with my Uncle David. He was at Walsh Industries, of course, probably already rearranging Grandpa's office to suit his own tastes. The Walsh Industries headquarters is an imposing glass tower in downtown Hartford. I'd visited countless times as a child, riding the elevator to the top floor where Grandpa's corner office offered panoramic views of the Connecticut River. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Oh, Emma, I'm so sorry about your grandfather. He was such a wonderful man." "Thank you, Linda. Is my Uncle David available?" She buzzed his assistant, and within minutes I was escorted to what used to be Grandpa's office. David had already moved in, replacing Grandpa's antique desk with something modern and sterile. "Emma," David stood up, arms outstretched for a hug. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but I'd learned not to trust appearances. "I'm managing. I wanted to talk to you about yesterday, about the note." David's face fell. He gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs facing his desk, the same chairs where I used to sit as a child while Grandpa explained basic business concepts. "I'm sorry about that, Emma. We were all shocked. I had no idea Robert felt that way." "You had no idea," I repeated. "In all the years we've been family, he never mentioned any doubts about my parentage." "Never," David leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Emma, you have to understand, toward the end, Robert was different. He'd become suspicious, paranoid even. Margaret mentioned he'd been asking strange questions about your parents, about the accident." "What do you think? Was David telling the truth or covering something up? Comment below with your thoughts." "What kind of strange questions?" David hesitated. He wanted to see all the old records, your birth certificate, your parents' marriage license, even your mother's college transcripts. Margaret thought he might be developing dementia. "But you didn't think to get him examined by a doctor?" "We tried," David's voice rose slightly. "He refused, said there was nothing wrong with his mind, that he was just trying to understand something that had been bothering him for years." "What had been bothering him?" "He never said exactly, but Emma," David's voice dropped to a whisper, "he asked me once if I thought you looked like Michael, really looked like him." The words hit me like a physical blow. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that you're beautiful, but you don't really look like any of us. We always assumed you took after Sarah's side. But now you think differently." David was quiet for a long moment. "I think Robert discovered something about your mother, something that made him question everything." I left the meeting with more questions than answers. David seemed genuinely confused and hurt by the whole situation, but he also seemed relieved that I wasn't challenging the will. That bothered me. Next, I drove to the family compound. Margaret's car was in the driveway, a brand new BMW that probably cost more than most people make in a year. Margaret answered the door wearing designer workout clothes that had probably never seen the inside of a gym. Her smile was perfectly practiced. "Emma, darlings, how are you doing? Come in, come in." The guest house was immaculate, decorated in the kind of bland luxury that you see in hotel lobbies. Everything was expensive, nothing was personal. "I wanted to talk about yesterday," I said, accepting her offer of coffee. "Oh, sweetheart," Margaret's voice dripped with sympathy. "I know this must be so hard for you, but you have to understand Robert was very sick toward the end. His mind was going." "His mind seemed fine when I visited him." "Well, of course it did. People with dementia can seem perfectly normal in short interactions. But David and I were with him every day. We saw the decline." She poured coffee into delicate china cups, the kind that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Margaret, can I ask you something directly?" "Of course, dear." "Do you think I'm really Michael's daughter?" Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. What a strange question. It's not strange if my own grandfather questioned it. "Emma," Margaret sat down across from me, her expression becoming more serious. "I'm going to be honest with you because I think you deserve the truth. This is where things get really intense. What do you think she's about to reveal?" Robert started asking questions about Sarah about 6 months before he died. He wanted to know about her family, her background, why we'd never met any of her relatives. When David and I couldn't answer his questions, he started doing his own research. What did he find? He found inconsistencies. Sarah's background didn't add up. There were gaps in her history, documents that didn't match. Robert became convinced that Sarah had lied about her identity. So he decided I wasn't his granddaughter. He decided that if Sarah had lied about who she was, she might have lied about other things too, like who your real father was. The accusation hung in the air between us. Margaret was suggesting that my mother had been unfaithful, that I was the product of an affair. Did he have any proof of this? He was working on it. He'd hired a private investigator, ordered DNA tests, but he died before he got definitive answers. Where are these tests now? Margaret's expression became guarded. I don't know, his lawyer might have them. I finished my coffee and prepared to leave. At the door, Margaret grabbed my arm gently. Emma, I want you to know, regardless of what Robert believed, you'll always be family to us. But you have to understand why we can't challenge his final wishes. The business, the estate, it's a tremendous responsibility. Robert left it to David because he trusted David to preserve the family legacy. And he didn't trust me. He didn't think you were family. The words were delivered with surgical precision, sharp enough to cut, gentle enough to seem kind. I drove away from the compound with my head spinning. If Margaret was telling the truth, then Grandpa had spent his final months investigating my mother's past and questioning my paternity. If she was lying, then she and David were covering up something much bigger. That afternoon, I decided to talk to someone outside the family. Edward Hawthorne, the family attorney, had been handling Walsh business for 3 decades. If anyone knew the truth, it would be him. Hawthorne's law office was in an old Victorian house that had been converted into a professional building. His secretary, Mrs. Chen, had been working for him almost as long as he'd been working for the Walshes. "I'm sorry, Miss Walsh," she said when I asked to see him. "Mr. Hawthorne is in court all afternoon. Could I make an appointment for tomorrow?" She consulted his calendar. "He could see you Thursday at 2 p.m. "Actually, Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? You've been here a long time. Do you remember when my parents died?" Her expression softened. "Of course I do. You were just a little thing, so brave at the funeral." "Do you remember the custody arrangements? Were there any complications?" Mrs. Chen glanced toward Hawthorne's office, then leaned closer to me. "There was something unusual," she said quietly. "Your grandfather came in here the day after your parents' funeral with a box of documents. He spent 3 hours with Mr. Hawthorne going through papers, making copies, filing things away." "What kind of documents?" "I don't know exactly, but I remember thinking it was strange. Usually after someone dies, you gather their documents. But your grandfather brought documents to store here, not to review for the estate. Have you ever had someone hint at a family secret but not tell you the whole truth? It's so frustrating. Let me know in the comments. Are those documents still here?" "I wouldn't know. That would be confidential client information." But her eyes flicked toward a filing cabinet in the corner of the office, and I filed that information away for later. That evening, I decided to try a different approach. I called my cousin Jessica. Jessica and I had never been particularly close. She was 2 years younger than me and had lived a completely different life. Trust fund baby, private schools, summers in Europe. But we'd grown up together, shared childhood memories, attended the same family gatherings. "Emma, oh my God, yesterday was so awful. Are you okay?" Jessica's concern sounded genuine, which was somehow worse than Margaret's calculated sympathy. "I'm confused more than anything. Did you know Grandpa had doubts about me?" "What? No, Emma, that's crazy. Grandpa loved you more than anyone." "Then why did he leave me that note?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? But you can't tell my mom I said this." "Of course." "About a month ago, Mom had a huge fight with Grandpa. I was in the kitchen and I heard them shouting in his study. Mom was saying something about protecting the family, and Grandpa was yelling about lies and deception. When she came out, she was crying." "Did you hear anything else?" "Just one thing. Grandpa said, 'Margaret, if you don't tell her the truth, I will.' And Mom said the truth would destroy her." My blood went cold. "Jessica, who were they talking about?" I don't know, I assumed it was about Brad's gambling debts or something. But now, Emma, what if they were talking about you? This is getting intense. What truth do you think Margaret was hiding? Share your theories in the comments. After I hung up with Jessica, I sat in my apartment staring out at the Boston skyline, trying to process everything I'd learned. David seemed genuinely confused about the whole situation, but was oddly relieved that I wasn't fighting the will. Margaret claimed Grandpa had been investigating my mother's past and had concluded I wasn't his biological granddaughter. Edward Hawthorne was storing mysterious documents that Grandpa had brought to him after my parents' death. And Jessica had overheard a fight about someone needing to know the truth. But there was one person I hadn't talked to yet. One person who might have answers but had been conspicuously absent from all these conversations. Brad. My male cousin had always been the family screw-up, the one who burned through trust fund money on failed businesses, who needed constant bailouts from Grandpa, who never seemed to take anything seriously. But maybe that was exactly why he might know something the others didn't. Maybe being the family disappointment meant he'd been overlooked, had overheard conversations he wasn't supposed to hear. I found Brad at his usual spot, a trendy bar in downtown Hartford, where he held court with other trust fund kids and wannabe entrepreneurs. Emma, he jumped up to hug me, and I could smell expensive whiskey on his breath despite it being only 7 p.m. Cousin, how are you holding up? I've been better, can we talk privately? Brad gestured to a corner booth, and we sat down across from each other. Up close, he looked older than his 26 years, too many late nights, too much stress about money despite his privileged background. Brad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. And shoot. Did Grandpa ever say anything to you about me not being his real granddaughter? Brad's expression immediately became guarded. Why would you ask that? Because of the note, because of what everyone's been telling me about his suspicions. Brad signaled the waitress for another drink. Emma, you really want to know what I think? And yes, I think this whole thing is bullshit. His bluntness surprised me. What do you mean? I mean, I've known you my whole life. You're more of a Walsh than any of us. You've got Grandpa's integrity, his work ethic, his sense of justice. Mom and Dad, they're just writing the family name. So you don't think the note is legitimate? Brad leaned forward, lowering his voice. Can I tell you something? But this stays between us. Okay. 3 weeks before Grandpa died, he called me into his study. He was working on something at his desk, documents, legal papers, stuff I couldn't really see. But he looked up at me and said, Brad, I'm about to do something that's going to shock the family. But it's the right thing to do. Did he say what it was? No, but Emma, he looked excited, not angry, not suspicious. Excited, like he'd figured out a puzzle that had been bothering him for years. And then he died. And then he died. Brad finished his drink in one gulp. And suddenly my parents are telling everyone that Grandpa thought you weren't really his granddaughter. But Emma, I was there, I saw his face. Whatever he was planning to do, it wasn't about cutting you out of the family. Brad's revelation changes everything, doesn't it? What do you think Grandpa was really planning? Comment below. It was about bringing you in. Brad's words echoed in my mind as I drove back to Boston that night. It wasn't about cutting you out of the family. It was about bringing you in. What did that mean? How could I be brought more into a family I'd been part of for 16 years? Unless I hadn't really been part of it. Unless there was something about my place in the Walsh family that even I didn't understand. I spent the next 2 days diving deeper into public records, using every professional resource at my disposal. What I found changed everything. It started with my mother's mysterious identity change from Sarah Morrison to Sarah Miller. I'd confirmed that Sarah Morrison had indeed been a real person, born in Vermont, parents died in a house fire, attended university, then disappeared from all records in early 1994. But I found something else. Sarah Morrison hadn't just studied literature in college. She'd also been a research assistant for the genealogy department, specializing in estate research and inheritance law. She'd known how to trace family histories, She'd understood the legal complexities of inheritance, and she'd completely erased her own past. Why? The answer came when I found a newspaper clipping from Burlington, Vermont, dated March 15, 1993. Local woman inherits contested estate. Sarah Morrison, 22 of Burlington, has been awarded sole inheritance of the Morrison family estate following a 3-year legal battle with distant relatives. The estate, valued at approximately $2.3 million, includes the Morrison family home and several commercial properties. Morrison, whose parents died in a house fire in 1990, had been living with foster families while the inheritance dispute was resolved. The case was notable for Morrison's successful challenge to the original will, which had left the estate to her father's brother. Morrison provided evidence that the uncle had manipulated her dying father into changing his will while he was heavily medicated following a stroke. Sarah Morrison fought for what was rightfully hers, said her attorney, James Patterson. She proved that the original will reflected her father's true intentions, not the influence of someone who stood to profit from his death. Morrison could not be reached for comment and has reportedly left Vermont following the settlement. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. My mother hadn't just changed her identity, she'd been fighting the same battle I was fighting now. She'd been cut out of her own family inheritance by a manipulative relative, and she'd fought back and won. And then she'd disappeared. But why? I kept searching and found the answer in a follow-up article from 6 months later. Morrison heiress dies in suspicious car accident. James Morrison, 58, uncle of inheritance heiress Sarah Morrison, was killed last week when his car left the road during a rainstorm. Police report that Morrison had been drinking heavily and may have fallen asleep at the wheel. Morrison had been involved in a highly publicized inheritance dispute with his niece earlier this year. Following his defeat in court, Morrison had publicly blamed Sarah Morrison for destroying the family and had made several threatening statements to reporters. Sarah Morrison remains missing and could not be reached for comment about her uncle's death. Now I understood. My mother had won her inheritance battle, but her uncle's threats had made her afraid for her life. When he died in what was officially ruled an accident, she'd probably suspected it wasn't really an accident at all, and that whoever killed him might come after her next. So she'd taken her inheritance money, changed her identity, and started a new life as Sarah Miller. And somehow, that new life had led her to my father and the Walsh family. But there was still a missing piece. How did any of this connect to Grandpa's note and my supposed exclusion from the Walsh family? The answer came when I decided to do something I'd been avoiding. I ordered a comprehensive genealogy report on my own family tree. The results arrived by email 2 days later, and what I found made me understand everything. Comment below, have you ever done a DNA or genealogy test that revealed family secrets? The results can be shocking. According to the genealogy report, I was indeed related to the Walsh family, but not through my father Michael. I was related through my mother. Sarah Morrison hadn't just randomly met Michael Walsh in college, she'd found him, because Sarah Morrison was the daughter of Catherine Morrison, whose maiden name was Walsh. My mother's father, the one who died in the house fire, was James Morrison, but my mother's mother, who'd also died in that fire, was Catherine Walsh Morrison. Catherine Walsh, who according to the family tree, was Robert Walsh's younger sister. Robert Walsh wasn't my grandfather by marriage. He was my great-uncle by blood. And according to Connecticut inheritance law, if Robert Walsh had no direct descendants, which he didn't, since Michael had never been his biological son, but rather his adopted son, his estate would legally pass to his closest blood relative. Which was me. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I called the one person who might be able to confirm what I'd just discovered. Hawthorne and Associates, this is Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen, this is Emma Walsh. I need to see Mr. Hawthorne immediately. It's about my grandfather's estate, and I've discovered something that changes everything. There was a pause. Hold on, dear, let me check his schedule. A moment later, Hawthorne's voice came on the line. Emma, I was wondering when you'd call. Mr. Hawthorne, I need to ask you something directly. Did my grandfather know about my mother's real identity? Did he know she was Catherine Walsh's daughter? Another pause, longer this time. Emma, I think you'd better come in and bring whatever documentation you've found. We have a lot to discuss. An hour later, I was sitting in Hawthorne's office, surrounded by boxes of documents that Mrs. Chen had pulled from storage. Your grandfather brought these files to me the day after your parents' funeral, Hawthorne explained. He'd found them in your mother's personal effects, documents she'd kept hidden, but that proved her real identity. He opened the first box and pulled out a manila folder. Sarah Morrison's birth certificate, showing her parents as James Morrison and Catherine Walsh Morrison. Catherine's birth certificate, showing her parents as Thomas and Mary Walsh, your great-grandparents. And this. He handed me a letter, written in my mother's handwriting. My dearest Robert asterisk. If you are reading this, then something has happened to Michael and me, and Emma is now in your care. I need you to know the truth about who I am and why I've kept it hidden. My name was Sarah Morrison, and Catherine Walsh Morrison was my mother, your sister. She and my father died in a house fire when I was 19, and I inherited the Morrison estate. But my father's brother tried to steal my inheritance, and when I fought back and won, he threatened my life. When he died 6 months later, I was terrified. I took the money, changed my identity, and tried to disappear. I never meant to deceive your family, but when I met Michael and fell in love, I was afraid that telling the truth would put everyone in danger. Emma is your great-niece, your only living blood relative. She deserves to know her heritage, but only when it's safe. I've hidden documents proving our family connection in the safety deposit box at First National Bank, box 847. The key is taped under the drawer of my jewelry box. Please protect her, Robert. She's all that's left of Catherine's line. With love and trust. Sarah. I stared at the letter, my mother's words swimming through my tears. He kept this secret for 16 years, I whispered. He was protecting you, Hawthorne said gently. Your mother was right to be afraid. The Morrison case involved some very dangerous people, not just her uncle, but his business associates. Robert decided it was safer to let everyone believe the official story about your parents. But something changed. Yes, about 6 months ago, Robert learned that the last of the Morrison uncle's associates had died. The danger was finally over. He decided it was time to tell you the truth about your heritage. Hawthorne opened another folder. He'd been preparing to reveal everything. New legal documents establishing your true relationship to the family, a revised will that would make you the primary inheritor of his estate. He was planning to surprise everyone at his 85th birthday party next month. But he died first. And David and Margaret found his research before I could secure it. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. They knew, I said. They knew I was the real heir, so they forged that note to make me think I wasn't family at all. Hawthorne nodded grimly. The handwriting analysis came back yesterday. That note was not written by your grandfather. This is the moment everything changes. How do you think Emma should handle this revelation? Comment your thoughts. They stole my inheritance by making me believe I had no right to it. Emma, there's more. Hawthorne pulled out a thick legal document. Your grandfather had already begun the process of changing his will. This document, filed 3 weeks before his death, officially recognizes you as his great-niece and sole blood heir. Under Connecticut law, this supersedes the previous will that left everything to David. I stood up, my mind racing. How much of the estate are we talking about? All of it, Walsh Industries, the properties, the investment portfolio. Your grandfather's net worth was $1.2 billion, but the company alone is valued at $2.8 billion. Emma, you're not just an heiress. You're one of the wealthiest women in Connecticut. And David and Margaret know this. They have to know. They were managing Robert's affairs. They would have seen the legal documents he was preparing. I walked to the window, looking out at the Hartford skyline. Somewhere out there, my uncle and aunt were probably celebrating their successful deception, dividing up an inheritance that legally belonged to me. Mr. Hawthorne, what are my options? We can file a challenge to the will immediately. With the DNA evidence, your mother's documents, and the proof that the note was forged, we have an airtight case. The entire estate will be frozen pending investigation. How long would that take? 6 months to a year for full resolution. But Emma, there's something else you should know. He pulled out a final folder. Your grandfather wasn't just planning to leave you his money. He was planning to prosecute David and Margaret for embezzlement. He discovered that they'd been stealing from Walsh Industries for years, inflating their salaries, creating fake consulting contracts, diverting funds to personal accounts. How much? Approximately $47 million over the past 8 years. I turned back to face Hawthorne, so they didn't just steal my inheritance. They've been stealing from the family business for years. Your business now, legally speaking. And they killed him. The words came out before I could stop them. Hawthorne looked startled. Emma, that's a serious accusation. Think about it. Grandpa was about to expose their embezzlement and disinherit them in favor of me. A week later, he's dead of a sudden heart attack. And they just happened to find his research about my parentage before you could secure it. The medical examiner ruled it a natural death. Medical examiners can be wrong, especially when the family controls the narrative and nobody asks the right questions. I made a decision. Mr. Hawthorne, I want you to file the will challenge immediately, and I want to request a full audit of Walsh Industries going back 10 years, and I paused, thinking about everything my mother had endured, everything Grandpa had suffered, everything they'd tried to take from me. I want to request an autopsy review on my grandfather's death. Do you think Emma's right to suspect murder? What would you do in this situation? Let me know in the comments. Hawthorne looked concerned. Emma, are you sure you want to go down this road? These are very serious allegations against your family. They're not my family, I said firmly. David is my grandfather's adopted son, not his blood relative. Margaret married into the name. They have no legal claim to the Walsh legacy. But they raised you. They've been part of your life for 16 years. They've been lying to me for 16 years. And when they had the chance to tell me the truth about my heritage, they chose to forge a note that would make me believe I was nothing. I gathered up the documents and put them in my briefcase. File the challenge, Mr. Hawthorne, all of it. The will, the audit, the autopsy review. It's time for the truth to come out. This will destroy them, Emma. David and Margaret, Brad and Jessica, they'll lose everything. I thought about Jessica's confusion, her genuine concern for me. I thought about David's awkward sympathy. And then I thought about Margaret's calculated cruelty, her satisfied smile as she watched me read that forged note. They made their choice when they decided to steal from me, I said. Now they'll face the consequences. As I walked out of Hawthorne's office, I felt something I hadn't felt since reading that note: power. Not the power of money, though that would certainly be useful. The power of truth. The power of knowing exactly who I was and what I was entitled to. My name is Emma Catherine Walsh Morrison, great-niece of Robert Walsh, daughter of Catherine Walsh's daughter, and sole heir to the Walsh fortune. And I was about to take back everything that belonged to me. The legal papers were filed on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the entire Walsh Industries board had been notified that the company assets were frozen pending an inheritance dispute. By Thursday, the story was front-page news in the Hartford Courier. Walsh Industries heiress challenges will, alleges fraud. I was in my Boston apartment when my phone started ringing. David first, then Margaret, then Jessica, then Brad. I let them all go to voicemail. Instead, I called my boss Jennifer and asked for a leave of absence. Emma, what's going on? The news is saying you're challenging your grandfather's will. It's complicated, Jen, but I may not be coming back to Boston for a while. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Actually, yes. I'm going to need a forensic accounting team to audit a multi-billion-dollar company. Know anyone good? Jennifer laughed. I know someone excellent, you. I can't audit my own company. Conflict of interest. Your own, Emma, exactly how much money are we talking about here? Let's just say I might be able to afford my own forensic accounting firm soon. Have you ever had a moment where your whole life changed overnight? Share your story in the comments. That evening, I drove back to Connecticut to face the music. I decided to stay at a hotel rather than risk confronting the family before I was ready. But as I drove past the Walsh compound, I could see lights blazing in every window. The family was clearly in crisis mode. My phone had 37 missed calls. I listened to a few of the voicemails. David, Emma, please call me back. We can work this out. There's been a misunderstanding. Margaret, Emma, you're making a terrible mistake. That money will ruin you. Call me. Brad, cousin, what the hell is going on? Mom is having a complete breakdown. Jessica, Emma, please talk to me. I don't understand what's happening. Only one of them sounded genuinely confused. The others sounded panicked. The next morning, Hawthorne called with an update. The preliminary audit results are in, he said. Emma, it's worse than we thought. They didn't just embezzle $47 million. They embezzled $73 million, and they've been systematically destroying records to cover their tracks. What about the autopsy review? The medical examiner is reviewing Robert's case. They've agreed to test for substances that wouldn't normally be checked in a routine autopsy. And the will challenge. With the DNA evidence and the handwriting analysis, it's a slam dunk. The probate court has already indicated they're prepared to rule in your favor. How long before I have control of the company? Preliminary control within 30 days. Full legal control within 90 days, assuming no complications. I hung up the phone and made a decision. It was time to face them. I drove to Walsh Industries and walked through the lobby like I owned the place. Which, legally speaking, I did. Linda, the receptionist, looked confused when she saw me. Emma, I mean with the legal issues. Is David in his office? Yes, but he's in meetings all day about the company situation. Perfect, I'd like to join that meeting. I took the elevator to the top floor. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see David, Margaret, and 3 men in expensive suits who were probably lawyers. I knocked on the door and walked in without waiting for an invitation. Hello, everyone, sorry I'm late. The silence was deafening. David looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. Margaret's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. The lawyers looked confused. Emma, David said carefully, this is a private meeting about company business. Actually, Uncle David, since I'm about to become the majority owner of this company, I think all company business is my business now. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. Ms. Walsh, perhaps we should discuss this privately with your legal representation present. Oh, I'm not here for a negotiation, I said pleasantly. I'm here to make an announcement. I sat down at the head of the table, Grandpa's old seat. I know about the embezzlement, all $73 million of it. I know about the forged note. I know about the years of lies and manipulation. Margaret finally spoke, her voice ice cold. You ungrateful little brat, after everything we've done for you. After everything you've done to me, I corrected. But don't worry, Aunt Margaret, I'm not going to be cruel about this. What do you think Emma's about to do? Comment your predictions. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. David, I'm prepared to offer you a settlement. You and your family sign over all claims to the Walsh estate, admit to the embezzlement, and resign from all positions at Walsh Industries. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges, and I'll give you enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your lives. How much? One of the lawyers asked. $5 million, total, to be split among the 4 of you. Margaret laughed bitterly. $5 million? We've been managing a billion-dollar company. We deserve more than that. You've been stealing from a billion-dollar company, I corrected. You deserve to be in prison. $5 million is more than generous, considering you'll be keeping money that should be returned to the company. And if we don't accept, David asked quietly. Then I pursue full criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and elder abuse. You'll face federal prison time, and you'll lose everything anyway, your choice. The room was silent for a long moment. There's one more thing, I continued. Jessica can stay. Everyone looked surprised. Jessica didn't know about the embezzlement. She didn't participate in forging the note or hiding my true heritage. She's genuinely family to me, even if she's not blood family. She can work at Walsh Industries if she wants to, in a real job with real responsibilities. Jessica, who had been crying quietly, looked up at me with gratitude. But Mom, Dad, and Brad, I continued, you need to leave Connecticut permanently. I don't want to see you at family gatherings, company events, or anywhere else in my life. You can't do this, Margaret said. We raised you. No, you tolerated me while you stole from my family's company. There's a difference. I stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and one more thing. I'm changing the name of the company. It's going to be Walsh Morrison Industries, in honor of my mother and her family. The family that you tried to erase from history. This is such a powerful moment. How do you think the family will react? Share your thoughts in the comments. As I walked out, I heard Margaret screaming behind me, but I didn't turn around. The next week, David, Margaret, and Brad signed the settlement agreement. They took their $5 million and moved to Florida, as far from Connecticut as they could get while staying in the continental United States. Jessica stayed. She enrolled in business school and started working part-time in the Walsh Morrison Industries marketing department. She was smart and hardworking when she wasn't being spoiled by her parents' money. The autopsy review came back inconclusive. Too much time had passed to detect many substances, but the medical examiner did note several irregularities that warranted further investigation. I decided not to pursue it further. I had everything I needed. The company flourished under new management. I hired a team of ethical executives and implemented transparency measures that Grandpa would have been proud of. We donated the embezzled money to charities supporting foster children and inheritance fraud victims. 6 months later, Walsh Morrison Industries was valued at $3.2 billion. I was 28 years old and one of the wealthiest women in America. But the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was walking into Grandpa's study, my study now, and sitting at his desk with my mother's letter framed on the wall behind me. The real victory was knowing exactly who I was. Emma Catherine Walsh Morrison, daughter of two strong women who had fought for justice, great niece of a man who had protected me even when I didn't know I needed protection. The real victory was proving that integrity and truth are more powerful than lies and greed. 1 year after the will reading, I found myself back in Grandpa's study, though I'd redecorated it significantly. The heavy, masculine furniture was gone, replaced with lighter pieces that reflected both the Walsh and Morrison family histories. Photos of my mother and my great-grandmother, Catherine, sat alongside pictures of Grandpa and me. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Jessica knocked on the door. Emma, do you have a minute? Of course, come in. Jessica had changed dramatically over the past year. The spoiled trust fund baby was gone, replaced by a confident young woman who discovered she actually enjoyed working. She'd graduated from business school summa cum laude and was now heading up our corporate social responsibility division. I wanted to thank you again, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, for giving me a chance. You earned it. How are you settling into the new apartment? I love it. It's weird, paying my own rent and cooking my own meals, but I love it. She paused. Have you heard from my parents? No, have you? Mom calls sometimes. She's bitter. She keeps saying you stole everything from us, that we were the real family. I set down my reports. How does that make you feel? Honestly, relieved. I never realized how toxic it was, living with all that entitlement and resentment. Mom and Dad were always angry about something. The business wasn't growing fast enough. Grandpa wasn't appreciating them enough. Other people didn't respect the Walsh name enough. Then now I get to build something instead of just taking from it. Jessica smiled. Did you know we've placed over 300 foster kids in permanent homes through our foundation? 300 kids who won't grow up wondering if they really belong somewhere. That's so beautiful. Have you ever had the chance to help kids in similar situations? Share your experiences in the comments. After Jessica left, I walked out to the garden behind the main house. I'd had it redesigned to include a memorial section with benches and flowering trees planted in memory of family members we'd lost. There was a bench for my parents, Michael and Sarah, a tree for great-grandmother Catherine, and a special memorial garden for Grandpa, with his favorite roses and the chess set where he'd taught me to think 3 moves ahead. I sat on Grandpa's bench and pulled out my phone. I'd gotten into the habit of recording voice memos when I needed to think through complex problems. It's been exactly 1 year since I learned the truth about my family, I said into the phone. A year since I discovered that everything I thought I knew about my identity was both completely wrong and completely right at the same time. A cardinal landed on the chessboard and cocked its head at me. Grandpa always said cardinals were messages from people who loved us. I was wrong about being Michael's biological daughter, but I was right about being a Walsh. I was wrong about Margaret and David being my family, but I was right about belonging to something bigger than myself. The cardinal flew to a nearby rose bush, and I smiled. The hardest part wasn't the legal battles or the money, or even the betrayal. The hardest part was learning to trust my own instincts again. For weeks after reading that note, I questioned everything I thought I knew about myself. Was I really the person I thought I was? Did I really deserve love and respect and belonging? I stood up and walked over to the chessboard, moving a white pawn 2 spaces forward, Grandpa's favorite opening move. But here's what I learned. Your identity isn't determined by other people's opinions or even by DNA. It's determined by your choices, your values, your actions. I am a Walsh and a Morrison not just because of bloodlines, but because I chose to fight for truth and justice the way both sides of my family always have. I moved a black pawn in response to my white one. My mother changed her name and her entire identity to protect herself and eventually to protect me. But she never changed who she was at her core, someone who fought for what was right, even when it was dangerous. Grandpa kept my true heritage secret for 16 years, not because he was ashamed of it, but because he was protecting it. He knew that someday the truth would come out, and he wanted to make sure I was strong enough to handle it. I looked back at the house, where lights were beginning to come on as evening approached. Walsh Morrison Industries employed over 2,000 people now. Our foundation had helped hundreds of families. The company Grandpa built was thriving under ethical leadership. The money is nice, I said into the phone. I won't lie about that. Financial security means I never have to depend on anyone else's approval or generosity. I can make choices based on what's right, not what's profitable or safe. What would you do with that kind of financial freedom? Tell me in the comments. I love hearing about people's dreams and goals. But the real inheritance wasn't the $1 billion or the company or the estate. The real inheritance was the knowledge that I come from a long line of strong women who fought for justice. Sarah Morrison, who challenged a corrupt will and won. Catherine Walsh Morrison, who raised a daughter to value truth over comfort. Sarah Morrison Walsh, who sacrificed her identity to protect her child. I made another move on the chessboard, a knight to Queen's Bishop 3, one of the strategies Grandpa had taught me. And now it's my turn to carry on that legacy. Not just by running a company or managing money, but by using everything I've been given to help other people who are fighting their own battles for truth and justice. I walked back toward the house, leaving the chess game set up for tomorrow. To anyone listening to this who feels like they don't belong, who's been told they're not good enough or not really family or not deserving of love, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition. Your identity isn't dependent on their approval. Sometimes the people who try to exclude you are actually revealing that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I paused at the back door, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. My name is Emma Catherine Walsh Morrison. I am the great niece of Robert Walsh, the daughter of Sarah Morrison Walsh, and the heir to a legacy of fighting for truth. But most importantly, I am someone who learned that the greatest revenge isn't causing pain to people who hurt you, it's building something beautiful from the ashes of their cruelty. I tucked my phone away and walked into my house, the house where I finally, truly belonged. Behind me, the cardinal sang one last song before settling in for the night. What did you think of Emma's story? Rate it -10 in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, share your story. You never know who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice, family secrets, and finding your true strength. Your story could be next. Also, let me know, what would you have done in Emma's situation? Would you have been as generous with the settlement, or would you have pushed for criminal charges? I read every comment and love hearing your perspectives on these complex family situations. Until next time, remember, the truth always finds a way to surface. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to dig for it.